This is Dan Wootton tonight with me, Mark Dolan, with you all week. Breaking tonight, The Sun is reporting that the BBC star, suspended over sex claims, has been accused of breaking lockdown rules to meet one young stranger he met on a dating site. This comes after a second young person sensationally claimed that they received abusive and expletive-filled messages from the still unnamed presenter. So, isn't it time the corporation and its hapless Director General, Tim Davie, ended this farce and named the man at the centre of this growing storm? I'll make that case in my digest next before my superstar panel have their say. Tonight we're joined by Baroness Foster, Calvin Robinson and Rebecca Reid. Plus, as Tim Davie admits the Beeb is scrambling to salvage its reputation after this latest scandal.
One thing I would say is these are clearly damaging to the BBC.
Do you still have trust in the clash? That's what I'll be asking the BBC. Do you trust it? We'll hear from both sides on that one. Then, a man who spent 26 years at Broadcasting House, journalist and author Tom Bower gives his unfiltered verdict on what he believes is now a leaderless organisation. He'll also have the latest on Harry and Meghan and their growing drama too. Also coming up, would you give up space in your home for a migrant? That's a radical idea backed by a former Tory minister to help slash our £2 billion immigration hotel bill. And I'll ask my panel if they would be willing to shack up with an asylum seeker to save the taxpayer money. You won't want to miss that one. But with costs soaring, can we ever solve the migrant crisis? Reform UK leader Richard Tice sets out his plan to stop the boats and shore up our borders, live in the studio shortly. Plus, as the one-year anniversary of Liz Truss's leadership campaign is marked by mortgage rates soaring to a 15-year high, has our low-tax queen been proved right? Her former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng joins me live later in the show. Tomorrow's front page is on the way too, hot off the press, and I'll crown a new Greatest Britain and Union jackass. This is Dan Wootton tonight, a very busy 2 hours to come. It's a BBC in Crisis special. Let's go. More explosive revelations coming thick and fast. You're watching GB News, Britain's news channel. My digest is on the way, but first the headlines with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Mark. BBC presenter Jeremy Vine has put pressure on his unnamed colleague at the centre of two sets of allegations, suggesting it may be time for him to go public. It comes as a second person has come forward to make a complaint against the BBC presenter, accused of paying for sexually explicit photos. The broadcaster says it spoke to a person in their early 20s who claims they were sent a number of threatening messages by the host after they were allegedly contacted by the presenter on a dating app. The person says they were put under pressure to meet the BBC star, but never did. Well, speaking to the BBC, the second young person, who was not involved in the previous payments for photos allegation, says they remain scared by the power the presenter holds. Well, separately, the BBC has published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball is the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. A 15-year-old boy has been charged with attempted wounding with intent and possession of a bladed article after a teacher was stabbed in Gloucester yesterday. The male teacher, Jamie Sansom, who was injured in Tewkesbury Academy, was discharged from hospital yesterday evening. Police said they did not believe it was terror-related. The boy will remain in custody tonight before appearing in court tomorrow. The NATO chief has announced allies have agreed to 3 steps to bring Ukraine closer to membership. Jens Stoltenberg said 11 nations will start training Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16 jets. They have also removed the requirement for a membership action plan, making Ukraine's path to becoming a NATO country easier. Well, in addition to this, they will create a Ukraine-NATO Council for consultation and for decision-making, with the first meeting set for tomorrow. Joe Biden's former Chief of Staff, Susan Platt, told GBNews the NATO membership won't happen until the conflict is over.
The U.S. has done everything they can in support of the war in Ukraine against Putin's army, and will continue to do that. I think there's time for everything, and I think it's great that we now have really a pretty much of a brick wall by including Finland and Sweden. Thank you to Mr. Erdogan joining in the NATO alliance against Russia.
A Romanian people smuggler has been jailed for 12 years and 7 months for the manslaughter of 39 Vietnamese migrants in 2019. 50-year-old Marius Draghici fled the country after the bodies of migrants were discovered in a container. They were being transported from Belgium to Essex by ferry. The High Court judge described Draghici as the organisers' right-hand man. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
I've started, so I'll finish. If only there were more masterminds at the BBC. The national state broadcaster, full of pointless celebrities, looks to be the weakest link at the moment, with a confused public playing a prolonged game of Doctor Who in relation to the identity of this unnamed star who allegedly paid for explicit images from a young person. Well, things get worse for the Beeb, as their own news division now sensationally report that a second young person has come forward telling BBC News they felt threatened by the presenter. The individual in their early 20s was reportedly first contacted anonymously by the presenter on a dating app. According to the Beeb's own reporting, the youngster says they were put under pressure to meet up but never did. When the young person hinted online they might name the presenter, they say they were allegedly sent abusive, expletive-filled messages. The youngster, unconnected to the person involved in the original allegations, said they'd been scared by the power the presenter held. They said the threats made in the messages, and which have been seen and verified by BBC News, had frightened them, and they remain scared. And breaking tonight, The Sun report that a third individual, aged 23, claims that the unnamed presenter broke lockdown rules for one encounter in February 2021. That is a third alleged person involved. Now, the Beeb looked to have been asleep at the wheel in the handling of the previous allegations, having sat on their hands for 7 long weeks before even raising the issue with the presenter accused. This will add further to a nightmare that threatens to worsen the BBC's already battered reputation in the eyes of the public. From day one, on the 18th of May, what these parents had to say ought to have put the BBC on high alert, with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, no less, this morning quite rightly saying these are serious and concerning allegations.
We have an existing set of laws that govern free speech and privacy. I think it's important that the BBC conducts this investigation quickly and rigorously, given the concerning and serious nature of the allegations.
This is starting to look like a comedy of errors from a broadcaster that brought us The Office, Faulty Towers and Only Fools and Horses. Well, they're making fools of us now, as they continue to treat us like children, withholding the identity of a man whose wages you and I pay. Whether a criminal offence has been committed is frankly neither here nor there. A picture is emerging of a major BBC talent, we're told a household name, who was so arrogant, so reckless and felt so untouchable that he allegedly handed over thousands of pounds and asked for pornographic images from a potentially vulnerable youngster. We're supposed to look up to these people, folks, the media elite, fat cat state-subsidised stars on wildly inflated salaries, treated like mini emperors, all at your expense. In what will add insult to injury, the former editor of the Sun newspaper, Kelvin Mackenzie, told me on this show last night that although he thinks this individual will never reappear on our television screens, he may get a healthy severance package. Yes, you guessed it, paid for by you and me. Of course, the Beeb would already love to close the chapter on this horror story, but there are now more questions than answers. How has this young person found the funds to employ a top firm of London lawyers? They must have been very fastidious with their pocket money. And whilst lawyers for the youngsters say the story is utter rubbish, what about the parents, who we're told have received no money for going to the Sun? They insist the star has got into the head of their child, and who it's alleged even frantically called them in recent days saying, "What have you done?" And according to the Sun reports, begged the mother to end the investigation. The Sun maintain they have firm evidence proving payments were made and even possible photographic evidence of the online exchange. If the BBC think they can ride out this and that we'll just shrug our shoulders and move on, well, they can think again. Until the star is named or has the courage to fess up himself, the story will become increasingly toxic and corrosive for the national broadcaster and will further undermine public trust in the institution. Even one of its biggest stars, Jeremy Vine, has urged the presenter to come forward and spare his colleagues further embarrassment. This current unseemly cover-up is an insult to the intelligence of the British people. Perhaps an MP should use his or her powers of parliamentary privilege in the House of Commons to lance the boil and name the star. If I was in the House, we can but dream, I would name and shame. The BBC would like to think the story is coming to an end, but let me tell you, it's only just begun. Let's get reaction now from my superstar panel. Conservative peer, Baroness Foster, GB News star, Calvin Robinson, and author and journalist Rebecca Reid. Calvin, let me start with you.
Uh-oh.
What have the BBC done wrong here?
I don't think it's what the BBC have done wrong here. I think it's what the host has done wrong here, in that someone has acted immorally, and if there is illegal activity, the BBC needs to refer it to the police, and then it becomes a police matter.
Indeed. Do you take my view, though, that actually whether a crime has been committed or not is neither here nor there? If this is somebody that was an important figure in the BBC, they shouldn't have behaved in this manner.
I do agree they shouldn't have behaved in this manner, but I don't agree with you that they need to be named and shamed, because I believe in innocence until proven guilty, and they haven't been to court, they haven't had their fair share of justice, so I don't think it's in anyone's interest yet for them to be named.
How about you? What do you think? Name and shame, Rebecca?
I'm genuinely shocked to find people sort of baying for blood already. The idea...
Not blood, just the truth.
Oh, come on. The idea that somebody could turn around and say that any of us had done something and that our employer, rather than conducting a private internal investigation, should throw you to the wolves and tell everybody who you are is shocking. Like, we have arguments intermittently about anonymity for people who are accused of rape, and the same people who seem to be calling for this person to be named would always say that were a man accused of rape, he should be given anonymity. It's an extraordinary cognitive dissonance going on here, and I think it's largely about wanting to bash the BBC. I think it's a lot of people who hate the BBC using this as a stick to beat them with.
The people who don't like the BBC were not responsible for this behaviour. The Sun newspaper is chock full, indeed alleged behaviour, absolutely, but the Sun newspaper is well armed with top legal advice. There's no way they would go to press with this unless they had done their homework. They claim that they've got evidence of payments. Are we not to take the comments of the parents seriously?
Are we not to take the comments of the alleged victims seriously?
No, we're not.
Surely the alleged victim gets to be the person who makes the decision about whether or not they feel they have been abused.
Do you know why I have a question mark about the alleged victim? Because the alleged victim is speaking through top London lawyers. Who's paying for those lawyers?
Well, surely the worst thing that you could do if someone was alleging something against you would be to get them really, really good lawyers who have a duty of care.
Who's paying for the lawyers?
I'm not sure that us speculating about who is paying for the lawyers is necessarily a very good idea legally or morally.
It raises a question mark over the veracity of this denial by the youngster.
I don't think it does. I think that's stripping somebody of their agency.
Well, the issue there is if this youngster was groomed, then they might not be speaking truthfully. They might be speaking because they've been groomed.
The parents allege, via the Sun newspaper, Baroness Foster, that this presenter has got into the head of their son. They certainly haven't gone to the papers to make money. They've received no fee. So I think there's more to this than meets the eye.
I think this is such a complex issue. And the reason I say that, because I do actually agree with some comments from the panel here. You've got two issues here. You've got how the BBC have behaved with these allegations. A member of staff, a key member of staff, apparently, who is a well-known person. And then you've got the other side of an argument, is what you do if somebody is accused, because we've also seen when that goes wrong.
Sure.
So I would say, first of all, the BBC are an arrogant organisation. When there are things that go wrong in the BBC, they are wholly reluctant to actually turn around and admit they've made errors. And that seems to be endemic, and certainly over the last few years, in a number of areas. Just as an example, when we're looking at, you know, are you guilty or are you innocent? Look at the antics out of the BBC over Sir Cliff Richard. Not even in the country. We've got a helicopter going to his home, which he never, ever returned to. It absolutely decimated his life. And then that also fell into other allegations and other issues that went on with Lord Bramall, with Sir Leon Britton, with my friend Harvey Proctor, who were then accused of all sorts of horrendous crimes, and none of it was true.
And these people are traumatised.
And this was how this sort of chain then reacted. So I do think, you know, I'm not going to question the person's integrity or the parent's integrity.
OK.
I don't know what happened. None of us do. But I think the BBC now have to really step up. And I think, as you say, the name of the person is apparently in the public domain. We don't know whether they are, you know, guilty or they're innocent. But this needs to be dealt with, and dealt with very quickly.
OK, well, let's take a look at this new development. As I've just revealed, a breaking news story from the Sun newspaper. The suspended presenter allegedly broke lockdown rules in February 2021 to visit a 23-year-old stranger who he also met through an online dating site. The young person told The Sun he came round for an hour. I was quite shocked that he broke the rules because of who he is. I was just a random person online. I think we're now entering a situation here of national interest to find out who this person is. It's embarrassing for colleagues who have to go on Twitter and say, it's not me, Gov. Calvin, we've got to lance the boil.
No, I think this just shows that people are jumping on the bandwagon. It's becoming a bit of a witch hunt, because this new person to speak up is an adult, so there's no implication of illegal activity, and everyone broke lockdown rules unless this...
Especially by February 21.
Indeed, unless this presenter was someone who was speaking out for the lockdown and promoting the lockdown.
Well, every single BBC star, now, of course, we're going to say allegedly, but every BBC star was behind the lockdown narrative. I can't remember anyone who said, maybe this isn't a good idea. So, look, my brilliant pundits tonight think there's not much to see here. Well, I disagree. I think that this is a massive story. Let's now get a direct statement from the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, who has defended the broadcaster's handling of the allegations in an awkward interview with Radio 4's World at One. Take a listen.
As you can see from the timeline, they were contacted. There was no response. We can debate how many times that should have happened, but the allegations were taken seriously.
There you go. Listen, I'm very, very concerned about the different stories that are coming out in relation to this person. They're on the public payroll. Their colleagues are embarrassed, and endless damage is being done to the organisation. So I would name and shame what do you think, Dan, at gbnews.com. We'll get to your feedback very shortly. Now, with hotel costs running at over £2 billion a year, will we ever solve the migrant crisis? Reform UK leader Richard Tice joins me live in the studio to answer just that. But first, as this alleged sex scandal threatens to engulf the BBC, do you still trust the national broadcaster? Social commentator Narinder Kaur takes on Defund the BBC director Rebecca Ryan. That's coming up next. Let us know what you think. Email us, Dan at gbnews.com, or tweet us at gbnews. And there's a poll up, so do vote in that. Lots to get through. It's going to be a lively hour. Richard Tice, Kwasi Kwarteng and Tom Bauer to come, but it's time now for the clash. And shocking, breaking revelations from the Sun newspaper tonight accused the BBC's sex scandal presenter of breaking COVID lockdown rules in 2021 to meet men, a young man, I should say, that he matched with on a dating app. The person who the presenter told The Sun the BBC were briefing the nation on the rules when their star, who was part of the institution, was quite happy to break them. Director General Tim Davie today said the sex scandal rocking the broadcaster was damaging the embattled corporation, insisting he'd launch a probe to re-examine how serious complaints were red flagged through the organisation. Davie admitted he has not yet spoken to the BBC presenter in question, who continues to remain anonymous.
The BBC, as you know, Sarah, is often in the midst of quite painful and difficult affairs and storms. And I think one thing I would say is these are clearly damaging to the BBC. It's not a good situation. And under my leadership, we will absolutely be as transparent as we can.
Although you could argue that it wouldn't be The Sun doing the running on this story, it would be the BBC if the processes had worked properly.
So what do you think? Does the BBC have questions to answer for its handling of the case? And can it retain the trust of the public? Let me know your thoughts. Dan at gbnews.com. Tweet me at gbnews and vote in the poll. Doing battle on this right now is the director of Defund the BBC campaign group, Rebecca Ryan, and social commentator Narinder Kaur. Well, Rebecca Ryan, let's get the ball rolling here. Does this story bring the BBC into further disrepute?
Absolutely it does. I think this is really frustrating for the British public who are being tapped up to fund this organisation that is stumbling from one sex scandal to another. And people are so frustrated that they're being forced to fund something, which, you know, poll after poll shows that 2/3 of Britons want to get rid of the licence fee anyway. But yet we're still forced to if they want to watch any live broadcast TV. And therefore, they're having to fund this kind of chaos. And we've had Tim Davie saying that, you know, putting his hands up and saying, you know, this doesn't look good. Obviously, it's damaging. You know, we can interpret that it's a complete and utter mess and chaos at the BBC there, allegation after allegation. It's not a good look. And not only is it not a good look, but it's really frustrating for British people who are struggling to pay their bills at the moment, to put food on the table, to get, you know, shoes for their kids, being forced to pay for the BBC, which is just in a whirlwind of chaos right now.
Well, indeed, we've got allegations, Narinder Kaur, of a BBC star completely out of control in their behaviour, with 35 grand to spare to pay, allegedly, for pornographic images, money that we are forced to pay through the licence fee.
Oh, forced. Listen, allegedly. Rebecca, you sound quite misguided. And I think that your whole agenda here is to discredit the BBC again and again. And you've just jumped on a story that's actually a non-story. This isn't a BBC scandal. This is the Sun newspaper scandal. These are allegations given by the parents to the tabloids, not even the police. We must have presumption of innocence. That is vital to our justice system, and we have to let the process take its course. If something criminal has happened, then the police will deal with this. This is not for public consumption, and it is not of public interest, even if it's a BBC. And I think the BBC have been quite right in dealing with this and not naming the accused. They're quite right.
Narinder, quite right for sitting on their hands for 7 weeks when two concerned parents approached the BBC about their crack addict son. You think that was the right thing to do? That they would wait for 7 weeks?
No, they were drip-fed information as far as I know. And actually, 7 weeks isn't all that long for such a big allegation. And the fact that these parents didn't go to the police, they went to a tabloid newspaper. The victim, the alleged victim himself, has rubbished the claims. This is a non-story. Rebecca, I think it's quite laughable.
Narinder,
yes, Mom.
You make it sound like they went to the tabloids somehow for publicity or money. They've received no fee. They would argue they were worried about their child.
Well, this is all allegations. The BBC, I will go back to this, they've handled this correct because actually the alleged accused, is protected under libel law, employment law and privacy law. So they are quite right, because they have a duty of care to their employee. As you said yesterday, and you've said quite a few times, Mark, oh, we are forced to pay this. This is our taxpayers' money. It's his wages. It's his wages. He can do what he likes. It's none of our business if no crime has taken place. This is all allegations. It's quite laughable. This story is a non-story, Mark. It needs to go.
Rebecca, do you think that the BBC should name and shame the star?
I don't think that the BBC should necessarily name and shame, but I think it's right for him to put this to rest now and come out. Now that we've had 2 further allegations, you know, it's becoming clear. Everybody knows who it is. You know, if you speak to anybody on the street...
I actually don't know who it is. I actually don't know who it is. And Rebecca, just because he broke lockdown rules, you feel that he's got to come out now. There's no story here, and he or she shouldn't have to come out. And I think it's absolutely you're just jumping on something to discredit the BBC, and there's nothing here. Honestly, go to bed.
Rebecca,
I mean, I was invited on here to speak about it, and I've been invited on numerous outlets to talk about it. I'm not pushing this agenda.
But
so
you've
I
been
think that's
talking
a
rubbish.
bit of a
You are
strange
pushing this agenda.
attack.
You run a website
One at a
called
time.
Defund the BBC. You run a whole group called Defund the BBC. Of course you've got an agenda. Your agenda is dark and sinister. And actually you've got nothing to back it up. You've got nothing but allegations from a tabloid newspaper. It's quite embarrassing, actually.
No, not allegations from a tabloid newspaper. You're framing that in a very prejudicial way.
Evidence, Mark.
You keep throwing the word tabloid newspaper around. The Sun is a respected tome of Fleet Street, and it's reporting the comments of 2 allegedly concerned parents.
In that case, Mark, why have they not named him? Name him or he or she. Why haven't they?
Now, Rebecca,
the BBC can't because there is law in this country, Mark. We have a law, and we must follow the law.
I believe that the national broadcaster, which of course means that if you're a star on the BBC, you're essentially a public servant. If your behaviour allegedly falls below the correct standard, I think that you should be known to the public. We are their employer at the moment. By staying silent. Don't interrupt me, Narinder. I've got to make this point. By staying silent, they are damaging the institution, which I'm sure you would love to see survive. Of course, Rebecca wants to see it closed down or defunded. But Rebecca, is it really the fault of the BBC, who employ 22,000 people, if one of their employees goes rogue? Why is that their fault?
I think the thing is, and I'm not sure if you can still hear me because my screen has frozen there.
We've got you.
Can you hear me? Yep, you can.
Yes.
So I think the thing is that we have seen this is a pattern of behaviour from the BBC, that they're not able to deal with these kinds of things in a timely and effective manner. And that's what people are really frustrated about, you know, is that this is taxpayers' money. This is money that people are forced to pay.
Rebecca, you keep saying that this timely thing.
You have spoken. This is the people who are funding this. The British taxpayer wants to see things dealt with in a timely and effective manner. This is a complete mess that's playing out.
OK, Rebecca,
there is no mess.
Narinder
we have to follow law, Rebecca.
OK, the clock is against us.
And a procedure.
All right, so look, it's all about opinions. We'll get to more of your thoughts shortly. Dan at GBNews.com. My thanks to Narinder and Rebecca. Who do you agree with? Do you still trust the BBC? Debbie on Twitter says, I lost trust in the Beeb in their cover-up of Savills crimes. Then there was the Martin Bashir episode. Trust is hard to come by, but very easy to lose. Toby says the BBC get most things right. Yes, they have made some mistakes, but so has every organisation. Susie says retain trust would imply I had trust in the BBC in the first place, which is incorrect. And your verdict is in. 18% of you say you do retain trust in the BBC. 82% say you don't trust the BBC anymore. Coming up, former Culture Secretary David Mellor delivers his verdict on the growing crisis at the BBC. Lots to get through. It's a BBC in Crisis special. Kwasi Kwarteng, Tom Bauer and Richard Tice on the way, but first the weather.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Further heavy showers over the next few days, quite breezy as well, temperatures around average for the time of year. So we look at the bigger picture. Low pressure is in charge of our weather at the moment, bringing in those showers. Pushes just a little further east over the next few days, introducing a northwesterly flow. So quite chilly around some northwestern coasts of the UK. To end Tuesday, showers fade for a time across parts of England and Wales, but continue across Northern Ireland and Scotland. Through the night, some of these heavy at times, then pushing back into Northern England and North Wales by the end of the night. Temperatures for all in double figures, 14 or 15 Celsius as minimums in towns and cities, a little lower in the countryside. The best of the sunshine first thing will be across southeastern parts of the UK. Further north and west, it's quite cloudy. There'll be some showery rain, and this slowly pushes south and eastwards through the day. Showers turning heavy at times by the afternoon. The odd rumble of thunder is possible, particularly across northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland too. We could see some localised disruption. And temperatures on the cool side, 17 to 19 across the north of the UK, 20 to 23, perhaps 24 across the far southeast of England. Into Thursday, a bright start to the morning. There will be some sunny spells around too, but there's scattered showers for many, perhaps less frequent and less heavy compared to recent days. Still highs around 23 or 24.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is Dan Wootton tonight with me, Mark Dolan. Straight talking, former Culture Secretary David Mellor has his say on the BBC scandal very shortly. But first, with hotel costs running at over £2 billion a year, will we ever solve the migrant crisis? Reform UK leader Richard Tice lays out his battle plan next. I've been looking forward to this time now for the man who wants to sink both the Tories and Labour and swipe the keys for number 10 in a political revolution. Reform UK leader Richard Tice is enjoying huge success in the polls as his party of common sense continues its surge in popularity. But perhaps the biggest political issue of all right now is the Channel migrant crisis. Taxpayers are forking out more than £500,000 a day, keeping 5,000 empty hotel beds reserved for migrants as a so-called buffer, which is more than the latest Levelling Up fund to help left-behind regions in the UK to find prosperity. It's also 3 times the budget to crack homelessness of British citizens. Richard Tice, the small boats saga is costing us £2 billion a year. Will we ever solve this crisis?
The truth is, Mark, it's actually costing 3 or 4 times that. We're not being told the truth about this. But let's be very, very clear. You know, you've seen the Lords reject the migration bill. You've seen the Court of Appeal reject Rwanda. The reality is the boats will keep coming. Nothing will stop the boats until we do what Australia did, and we're the only political party. Reform UK's plan, we've got a 6-point plan, but it revolves around the fundamental, kindest, most compassionate thing to do, which is to pick people up safely out of the boats and take them back to France. And the moment you do that, this vile trade stops. It stops within a fortnight. I promise you, if I was in charge, this thing stops in a fortnight. And here's the other point. If proper leadership was shown by people in the EU, if you do the same thing in the Mediterranean with Tunisia and North Africa, that stops as well, and people stop dying. That's why it's the kind thing to do, it's the compassionate thing to do, and it's the financially smart thing to do.
Rishi Sunak, Suella Braverman, they're not stupid people. They want to be re-elected next year. Rishi Sunak wants to remain Prime Minister. If that solution worked, he would do it. Why isn't he doing it?
Because I'm afraid he is, on this issue, he's just lacking in courage, lacking in leadership. I'm not saying he's stupid, but he is being politically incredibly naive. Look, Australia got a load of flack from all the usual international suspects. Yeah. But guess what? The boats stopped coming. It worked. I tell you what, you know, do what we know works. That's the one country that has sorted out this problem. So why don't we copy their issue? And here's the thing. I've read the international treaties. Under existing international laws, you can do what I have suggested. You can safely pick up and take back to the point of departure.
So you don't think we could be accused of breaking the law and face the mother of all court cases?
I've read the rules. I can tell you I would get some decent lawyers who believe in the cause of sovereign borders, right, secure borders, and we would say, under the existing international treaties, we are within the law. Yes, the French are going to be a bit grumpy for a couple of weeks.
Can you return people without the support of the French?
You can, under existing...
Without conducting a war with Emmanuel Macron?
I promise you, under existing international treaties, right, the Safety of Life at Sea Act, 1974, the UN Convention Law of Sea Act, 1980, right, you can do this. I've read it.
Are you
I know it's right.
This isn't snake oil? Because many people will say, of course, Richard Tice will say that. He's never going to become Prime Minister, but he's going to throw us some red meat. He said 2 weeks to stop the boats.
If this carries on, the single slogan of 3 words in the election next, whenever it is, will be stop the boats, like it was 10 years ago in Australia. And guess what? The party that says we will stop the boats won the election. And we're the only party with a plan that will stop the boats.
I'm willing to believe that is the case. You're a man of conviction. You're a man of your word. I've known you for a long time. But your efforts and your success at Reform UK, which is undoubted, and I think you're going to have massive momentum next year. I'm sick of emails about how great you are, by the way, coming in when I'm on air. So you've got your fan base, the people who feel politically homeless, like your party. But you're going to take votes off the Tories. You're going to hand the keys to number 10 to Keir Starmer. The lesser of 2 evils would be Rishi Sunak.
Mark, you
for another 5 years.
You fall into the same trap as Dan Wootton. Bless him. I hope he's having a lovely time. But you think there's any difference between the two? There's not. They're both socialists. They're different sides of the same socialist coin. If you want high taxes, nanny state, daft regulation and low growth and wasteful government spending, be my guest, vote socialism. If you want low taxes, high growth, smart regulation and secure borders, controlled immigration, vote Reform UK.
However, can you sleep at night knowing that you might have sent Keir Starmer to number 10?
I sleep extremely well every single night.
Surely Keir Starmer would be far worse than Rishi Sunak.
Rishi Sunak's been a disaster, Mark.
You call Sunak a socialist.
catastrophe.
But,
his
Richard,
5 pledges are going nowhere. He's half the year through. Well, what one of those pledges is he going to achieve by the end of this year? Tell me.
Well, he's struggling potentially.
Exactly.
If
He's a
lucky.
disaster.
He won't stop the boats.
Right?
The waiting list looks like a problem.
Right? The debt's going up. Inflation's not coming down. He's a disaster. Keir Starmer will also be bad for the country. He will try and take us.
Worse, surely.
He will try and take us even closer to the EU than some of the Tory
This is what I need
senior
to press
people
you on.
we're hearing about.
You want a reform UK government. You want to be Prime Minister, and more power to you. And I think that could be an election or two away because you're very youthful and you look after yourself, so you've got time. But the issue is the next election.
You cannot reward
risk,
failure, Mark, with incumbency.
But you
have to punish incompetence and failure.
Sure, but you risk for that, right? The Pyrrhic
It's
victory.
not a risk.
The Pyrrhic victory of Keir Starmer at number 10, and then you're like, fantastic, we've given the Tories bloody nose. This is a man who campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn, the ultra-socialist, to become Prime Minister. He campaigned to reverse
But
Brexit.
Sunak's an ultra-socialist. He wants higher taxes. He wants more government spending. He wants more regulations. He's not a Conservative. He's not a Thatcherite. He's a socialist.
Is it in the national interest for Britain?
It is in the national interest to
government?
get rid of socialism, Mark. Full stop.
All right, but you think we need a Labour government in between until we get rid of it?
I just want to get rid of socialism, which means get rid of the main two parties, because they are not good for this country. Look at the state we're in, Mark. The place is broken, and everybody knows it. And we're the only people with a vision to make Britain great again.
What's going to move the dial for you next year? Because the risk is that our first-past-the-post system will consign you to the sidelines. How do you get seats? Because that's what you need.
We stand everywhere.
Popular vote's a waste of time. Who cares?
We stand
that's
everywhere.
That's great for dinner parties.
Yeah, look, we stand everywhere, and the point is we give the great British population a different democratic choice. We all know first past the post is difficult. That's why we need to move to proportional representation. And actually many, many people, even in the Labour Party, realise that is the fairer system. Above all, we don't share first past the post in great company. The only other country that I'm told has it in Western Europe, Belarus, for heaven's sake. You know, so that's not great company. It hasn't led to stable government. It hasn't led to good government. If we had PR, we'd have an extra 10% of the electorate would cast their vote. That's 3 million more people involved in democracy.
When you talk very excitingly about stopping the votes
I am excited.
within 2 weeks, which is an almost Trumpian timeline, when you say that, again,
Put me in charge and I'll do it.
I'll take your word, but if you're in a proportional system, you'll never be in charge because you'd have to have probably support from left-leaning parties and you'd need the Lib Dems on board and a couple of SNP.
Look at what
you'd never get anything done.
Under PR, look at what Maloney's achieved, from 4% to 27% in just 4 years. She's Prime Minister and she is helping Italy be great again. She is making action, she's getting stuff done, and, you know, she's a sensible, socially conservative, family-minded person.
Richard Tice, only a few seconds. Should the BBC name and shame their
No, you're
alleged
completely wrong on this, Mark. Of course not. We know that MPs have told terrible mistruths within the House of Commons, even against your fellow presenter, Nigel Farage, that Chris Bryan did. We know that Tom Watson sold terrible things that led to real mistruths. And guess what? Even if they did name and shame, right, no one else can outside Parliament. So all you've done is put the name out there, but whoever that presenter is, they are innocent until proven guilty.
Straight answer to a straight question. Richard, we'll catch up again soon. My thanks to the leader of Reform UK, never boring, Richard Tice. Coming up after a second young person comes forward with damaging allegations against the unnamed BBC presenter. Is the scandal the final nail in the coffin for the Beeb's credibility? My superstar panel return to debate that. But first, former Culture Secretary and Tory grandee David Mellor offers his analysis on how the state broadcaster has dealt with the crisis. David Mellor is next. Now, breaking news in the last hour reported by the Sun newspaper. The suspended BBC star allegedly broke lockdown rules in February 2021 to visit a 23-year-old stranger who he met through an online dating site. The Sun has seen messages which suggest that as well as visiting the 23-year-old's home, the star asked for a picture and he was allegedly sent a semi-naked photograph. The presenter also allegedly sent cash to the youngster in 3 separate payments that totalled £650. So, to dissect another shocking new development to this story, I'm delighted to welcome barrister and former Culture Secretary David Mellor. Mr Mellor, the first allegations in relation to the first alleged victim date back to mid-May. Do you think the BBC should have acted more swiftly?
Of course. The BBC has handled this appallingly. I believe they hoped it was going to go away, and I think they probably wanted it to go away. And when it hasn't gone away, they have fumbled around. I mean, the Director General looks uncomfortable in the extreme in the various interviews he's given, and he should look uncomfortable. You cannot have a situation where a public service broadcaster allows a situation to be perpetuated where a man who faces these accusations, a man, by the way, that I know well, and I can't believe how he's mixed up in that. Maybe he isn't. But when you're caught up in something like this, he should say, it's me they're talking about. I didn't do X and didn't do Y, didn't do Z, instead of skulking behind his lawyers in a pretty outrageous way. And they've got to get to the bottom of this. We cannot have, the BBC, when you look at the money they get, it's a poll tax, isn't it? The money they get from the licence payer. We deserve better than we're getting from the BBC. And I think we probably, in truth, deserve better than we're getting from this presenter who should come out and say, I have been traduced, or he could say, it's absolutely true, but it can't go on like this.
Indeed not. Do you think this is an issue with the culture in the BBC, David, and the notion that their stars are untouchable?
Well, Mr. Lineker seems to prove that they are untouchable, or rather, the lunatics are in charge of the asylum. But we could spend hours dissecting our favourite moments of incompetence from the BBC, but let's not do that. Let's just focus on where we are at the moment. First of all, the lawyers. I'm a lawyer. I used to tell my mother I was a pianist in a strip club, but no, I'm actually a lawyer. And basically, the lawyers have messed this up, the judges, because the law used to be quite clear that until someone was charged with something, it was provided, of course, you didn't offend the libel laws. It was pretty much open season on naming who you wanted to name. Now there's an attempt to say that there's some privacy law not created by Parliament, but created in a muddled way by judges who, so you are not allowed to name somebody, although the whole world actually wants to know who that person is. And the person who should principally want the world to know who that person is the person himself. I think the judges have set a trap for the unwary. And unfortunately, we've got a fairly craven media, because they know perfectly well. It's said that 10% of the country now knows who this person is. I'm one of the 10%. I'm astonished and shocked. But he may not be true. But what they've got to do is get on and prove one way or the other. What we can't have is this phony war, this ridiculous situation where he skulks behind his lawyers and where the BBC failed to show any leadership whatsoever to justify this huge guaranteed income they get, where they don't have to be like GBNews. They don't have to go and prove that they're a broadcaster worthy of public trust. They get the money automatically. Well, let me just tell you, they don't deserve it on this evidence.
David Mellor, great to have you on the show. Thank you for your wise counsel, former Cabinet Minister and barrister David Mellor. Look, get your thoughts in, Dan at gbnews.com. Coming up, as mortgage rates soar to the highest level for 15 years, has the low-tax, high-growth plan of former PM Liz Truss been proven right? Her Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng joins me live in the studio next. Would we be in better shape if the party and the country had held their nerve and stuck with Liz? But first, The Sun have reported tonight that the unnamed BBC presenter allegedly broke lockdown rules to visit a young stranger in their flat. Plus, the paper has another bombshell revelation on tomorrow's front page. Stick around to see that. And there's reaction from my superstar panel too. Don't go anywhere. It is the media story of the year, and it is spicy stuff. Do you still trust the BBC? Do you think that the unnamed star should be outed by the organisation? Should he fess up? We'll discuss all of that next.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Further heavy showers over the next few days, quite breezy as well, temperatures around average for the time of year. So we look at the bigger picture. Low pressure is in charge of our weather at the moment, bringing in those showers. Pushes just a little further east over the next few days, introducing a northwesterly flow. So quite chilly around some northwestern coasts of the UK. To end Tuesday, showers fade for a time across parts of England and Wales, but continue across Northern Ireland and Scotland. Through the night, some of these heavy at times, then pushing back into Northern England and North Wales by the end of the night. Temperatures for all in double figures, 14 or 15 Celsius as minimums in towns and cities, a little lower in the countryside. The best of the sunshine first thing will be across southeastern parts of the UK. Further north and west, it's quite cloudy. There'll be some showery rain, and this slowly pushes south and eastwards through the day. Showers turning heavy at times by the afternoon. The odd rumble of thunder is possible, particularly across northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland too. We could see some localised disruption, and temperatures on the cool side, 17 to 19 across the north of the UK, 20 to 23, perhaps 24 across the far southeast of England. Into Thursday, a bright start to the morning. There will be some sunny spells around too, but there's scattered showers for many, perhaps less frequent and less heavy compared to recent days. Still highs around 23 or 24.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
It's 10 o'clock. This is Mark Dolan standing in for Dan Wootton this week. And breaking tonight, a second young person has come forward with damaging allegations against the unnamed BBC presenter, claiming that they received abusive and menacing messages from the star after they first met on a dating app. So could this growing scandal be the final nail in the coffin for the Beeb's credibility? That's the big debate with my superstar panel next. Tonight, Baroness Jacqueline Foster, Calvin Robinson and Rebecca Reed. Plus, the esteemed journalist Tom Bauer, who worked at the BBC for 26 years, offers his analysis on the crisis facing the broadcaster and its troubled Director General Tim Davie. And Tom also has news on a sensational return to the Hollywood acting scene for Meghan Markle. You won't want to miss that one. Also coming up, 1 year after Liz Truss announced her bid to become Prime Minister, mortgage rates have soared to the highest level for 15 years. So was Trussonomics the best thing for Britain after all? Has Liz Truss been proved right? Her former right-hand man, ex-Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, joins me live in the studio as he makes a case for low-tax Conservative policies. And as the annual bill for housing asylum seekers in hotels reaches a staggering £2 billion, should we give up space in our own homes to accommodate migrants, as suggested by the Tory MP Brandon Lewis? We'll discuss that controversial proposal in the Media Buzz. You'll also get a first look at tomorrow's front pages, hot off the press, and I'll be crowning a new Greatest Britain and Union jackass before the night is out. Lots to get through, a busy hour to come. A BBC in crisis special. First, the headlines with someone that's never in crisis, Polly Middlehurst.
Thank you very much, Mark. Well, Polly's taken a well-earned rest tonight, but it's me, Rory Smith. Well, as you've been hearing, a 23-year-old person claims the BBC presenter at the centre of allegations broke COVID lockdown rules to meet them during the pandemic. The Sun reports the young person says the star travelled across London to another county to meet them at their flat in February 2021 when coronavirus lockdown rules were in place. It comes as the presenter is already facing allegations of paying a teenager for sexually explicit photos and sending threatening messages to a young person in their early 20s. BBC presenter Jeremy Vine has put pressure on his unnamed colleague, suggesting it may be time for him to go public. Well, separately, the BBC has published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball is the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. A 15-year-old boy has been charged with attempted wounding with intent and possession of a bladed article after a teacher was stabbed in Gloucester yesterday. The male teacher, Jamie Sanson, who was injured in Tewkesbury Academy, was discharged from hospital yesterday evening. Police say they do not believe it was terror-related. The boy will remain in custody tonight before appearing in court tomorrow. The NATO chief has announced allies have agreed to 3 steps to bring Ukraine closer to membership. Jens Stoltenberg said 11 nations will start training Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16 jets. They've also removed the requirement for a membership action plan, making Ukraine's path to becoming a NATO country easier. Well, in addition to this, they will create a Ukraine-NATO Council for consultation and decision-making, with the first meeting set for tomorrow. Joe Biden's former Chief of Staff, Susan Platt, told GB News the NATO membership will not happen until the conflict is over.
The U.S. has done everything they can in support of the war in Ukraine against Putin's army, and will continue to do that. I think there's time for everything, and I think it's great that we now have really a pretty much of a brick wall by including Finland and Sweden. Thank you to Mr. Erdogan joining in the NATO alliance against Russia.
A Romanian people smuggler has been jailed for 12 years and 7 months for the manslaughter of 39 Vietnamese migrants in 2019. 50-year-old Marius Taragici fled the country after the bodies of migrants were discovered in a container. They were being transported from Belgium to Essex by ferry. The High Court judge described Draghici as the organisers' right-hand man. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tomorrow's news tonight in our media buzz. And we will kick off with the very first. Let's kick off with the first look at tomorrow's front pages. And we start with The Independent. Now BBC star faces abusive texts claim from second accuser. Presenter sent menacing messages to person who threatened to name him after meeting on dating app, is the allegation made in The Independent. TV boss admits sex images row has damaged BBC. And it took 7 weeks to interview star after complaint. Metro. Second young person bombshell, BBC star facing fresh claims. The Eye, BBC presenter accused of sending abusive messages to second person. And now in The Sun, shock new developments. BBC star broke lockdown to meet another young stranger. Another youngster told The Sun tonight that the scandal hit BBC star broke COVID lockdown laws to meet him. A different youth said the presenter sent them creepy messages with kisses and love heart emojis when they were just 17. So more problems for this alleged star and his employer, the BBC. For full reaction, my superstar panel. Conservative peer Baroness Foster, GB News star, who's always impeccably behaved. I'm not even sure he's got a smartphone. Calvin Robinson, and author and journalist Rebecca Reid. Well, look, a tough few days for the BBC, but has their reputation actually been on a downward spiral for years? The Jimmy Savile scandal remains a terrible blot against the state broadcaster, as does their cover-up of Martin Bashir's deceitful behaviour to obtain his infamous interview with the late Princess Diana. And more recently, the Beeb has been accused of biased news coverage, particularly in its reporting of Brexit and the COVID pandemic. How ironic, therefore, Calvin, if it were proven to be the case that this BBC star had broken lockdown rules, whilst everyone on the BBC was wagging their finger about lockdowns from day one.
They were, but the rest of the world was breaking these lockdown rules because they were immoral rules. They should never have been in place in the first place.
Indeed, but, you know, we saw how Boris Johnson and his government were hauled over the coals for Partygate, but it seems allegedly BBC stars might have been breaking lockdown rules too. I mean, this is just on top of story after story. Do you not think there's a sort of a momentum now behind this, which means it's not going to go away?
There is a momentum, but I don't like the momentum because it's like a witch hunt at this point. People are jumping on the bandwagon. The only issue that I've seen so far, the only legal issue I've seen so far is the under-18. That needs to be addressed, and that needs to be referred to the police.
I think the law is a red herring. It seems this alleged behaviour is not becoming of somebody that would have been a significant star on the BBC, a publicly funded individual, one of the faces of, do you know what I mean, somebody that's regularly associated with the channel, with the brand, a household name, allegedly behaving like this.
The BBC has a history of protecting sex pests, so it clearly needs to deal with this issue properly, clean house, more than one, and then this needs referring to the police, and then they need to put proper safeguarding measures and policies in place, which they seem to not.
Is Lee Anderson, the Tory MP, Tory Vice Chairman and GB News star, right to say the BBC is a haven for perverts, Rebecca?
No, I don't think that he is right to say that. I think it's fairly defamatory, and I think it's a really unintellectual thing to say.
Don't you think the BBC would have trouble suing that allegation?
That it's a haven for perverts? I mean, I'd be fascinated to see how you prove that someone...
Well, it was a haven for potentially Britain's worst ever paedophile.
Yes, absolutely.
Who committed those crimes on BBC property on occasions.
Absolutely, and that was a disgusting, disgusting case, and it was during a time where people were not educated about how to talk about when they were victims of sex crimes, and it was a time when people were allowed to get away with things in a different way. We have done progressively better as a society generally in how we talk about these issues as we have gone forward.
OK, but the BBC sits on its hands for 7 weeks after receiving a message from parents saying our son has received £35,000 from one of your stars and we've got the receipts?
I think that 7 weeks is actually fairly good, considering the sheer amount of red tape, bureaucracy.
It should be
and legal
7
action that
minutes.
you would need to interview somebody for an enormous allegation. You don't think that you would need to have done the research to prove that this was true, investigate whether or not these parents had anything to gain by it. There are so many things that have to be answered before you go about this. But I'm also really queasy about this idea that somebody needs to be morally upstanding in their private life in order to be able to do a job.
Yes, they do.
So every single person who's on television needs to behave really well in their private life at all times.
Well, the problem we have is that we don't...
Nobody on GBNews has any skeletons in their closet.
The issue is that we don't know the genre that this person was working in, but if they are a very high-profile figure within the organisation...
How high up can you be in a news channel or a broadcasting channel or a sports channel, any other channel? How high up can you be before you have to be morally good? And who gets to decide?
Well, I don't
right,
think anyone on this network, for example, you know, just hypothetically, that appears on a webcam naked or paying youngsters for, you know, outrageous images. If that comes out, I think that their position becomes untenable here.
That's not about the job, is it? That's about moral standards in society, surely.
But who gets to
Indeed,
decide
and
what
it would be about damage to the GB News brand, wouldn't it? I mean, Baroness Foster, what do you think about this? Because I just think that 7 years is a terribly long time. 7 weeks is a long time for the Beeb to have waited to act.
Well, I think I said initially when we began this debate earlier, the BBC is an arrogant organisation. It never seems to accept responsibility in so many cases. It can never be wrong. And you even see when they do things and it's been proven that they've actually made errors, they're so reluctant to actually to believe that, you know, that they've been found sort of guilty
Well, they didn't
of something.
speak to the alleged star until, I believe, Thursday of last week.
Well, I come to the point. So, as you've already mentioned, there have been some pretty dreadful cases. We obviously have to be relatively careful what we're saying here because we don't know whether this person is guilty or innocent. We have no idea.
And we also don't know the gender of the alleged victims, by the way.
But we also have to, if I may just take a general point here, because what is key is the word power. Now, I sit here and I've been involved in politics all of these years, and we have seen many, many political scandals. We have seen the same in the media, and we do see it with pretty high-profile people sometimes. And what I always find absolutely astonishing is the BBC have had this sort of situation arise before. Those who are in high-profile positions, the fact they've got themselves into these dreadful circumstances is beyond me, and they think that nobody's going to find out. And the same applies for politicians as well. I mean, we've had people who have been caught up in honey traps and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah.
And then you talk to your colleagues or whatever and you say, oh, my God, you know, you need to be very thoughtful about what you do. And the next time somebody turns around and they get caught up in other things. So they need to also... No, but all I'm saying is, I mean, we shouldn't have to not be able to do and go out and do various things in our lives, but you have to take a different view. If you are a public figure, if you are serving the public, if you are in a high-profile position, I'm afraid that you are going to be under a microscope. Everybody walks around with a mobile phone and a camera and, you know, people have their photos taken, as we said, social media. I mean, you have to be aware. So all I'm saying is you don't have to live your life like a monk or a nun or whatever, but what you've got to do is be very aware, and your position also has to reflect your behaviour.
And the parents of this alleged victim say that they were vulnerable, that they had an addiction to crack cocaine.
And the alleged victim says that it's all nonsense. What really troubles...
the alleged victim says all nonsense through their lawyers.
Yeah, but this feels like a weird...
How does a crack addict have access to top lawyers?
I don't know, and as I said before, I don't think speculating...
You don't know?
I don't think speculating about who's paying for it is legal or sensible.
What, is he put it on Barclaycard
I
or what?
really, really don't think it's sensible for us to be speculating about who's paying for his lawyers.
I think it's exactly what we should do.
What I wanted to say is that I find this weird new moral puritanism that you should only be able to have a certain job if you behave a certain way weird. Like, I don't think that, for instance, having 8 children by multiple women and having left your wife when she had cancer should make you not able to hold a high
Well, how about this? How about this?
You should still be able
how
to
about
have
this from
jobs.
the BBC's very own website? They said that threats allegedly made by the presenter in messages to a second youngster, which have been seen and verified by BBC News, had frightened them, and they remain scared. And you don't think that's a red flag?
I think I think this person's behaved very poorly if these things are true, 100%. I just don't think that means they can't do their job.
By the way, very briefly, do you think that this alleged star is keeping stum because they're waiting for a payout?
No, I think they're hoping it'll go away. I think they're wrong, but I think they were hoping.
OK, brilliant stuff. Look, a great debate. The BBC have said in a statement, new allegations were put to us on Thursday of a different nature in addition to our own inquiries. We also have been in touch with external authorities in line with our protocols. And Tim Davies said today that they have always taken the allegations seriously. Well, look, Baroness Foster, Calvin Robinson and Rebecca Reid are back very shortly. A great debate. Look forward to more of that. Coming up, is a leading think tank right that Brits should house Channel migrants in their own homes to cut the £2 billion hotels bill? I'll debate that with my superstar panel shortly. Can't wait for that. Sparks will fly. But next, interest rates are spiralling and mortgages are now higher than they were in the aftermath of Liz Truss's premiership. So does her former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng feel vindicated? The man himself is live in the studio in 2 minutes. Well, esteemed royal author Tom Bower is uncancelled shortly, but it's time now for the former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. And cash-strapped Brits felt the screw turn further today, with mortgage rates soaring to the highest level for 15 years. The average rate on a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.6%, higher So in the aftermath of former PM Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget, which spooked markets last year. Some homeowners coming off fixed-rate deals are now suffering payment hikes of up to £1,000 a month. But with a stagnant economy and inflation running riot, and warnings from the Bank of England that interest rates may continue to rise, does this prove that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were right all along? Well, Kwasi is with me in the studio.
Hi.
It's a year since Liz Truss announced her candidature
That's
for the
right.
Tory leadership. She won it by a significant margin.
Yeah, it was a decisive
had
margin.
A mandate from the party.
That's right.
Is she the great Prime Minister that got away?
Well, I think that, you know, she had a very clear message in that leadership campaign, and she wanted to reduce taxes. And that was very clear because, you know, as Conservatives, we all want to reduce taxes. And my view, looking back, I mean, I was very much involved in her government, as you know, was that, you know, we probably tried to do too much too quickly. And I think, and also critically, we didn't hold our nerve right through. I mean, it was very difficult. Polls were crashing.
Was the top rate tax cut politically foolish?
I think it may have been politically naive, but we reversed that. And I've seen budgets reversed, but I was very disappointed.
By the way, it would have cost possibly, you know, very little or nothing. Could have been cost neutral.
And also my point was always that, well, the top rate of tax in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is 40%. So, you know, for me, I thought, well, we've got to try and be as competitive as the Republic of Ireland. But of course, you know, that was perhaps a bridge too far. But my big disappointment was, of course, being summoned back from Washington and then being sacked. And I'm just bewildered by it.
Well, when she got rid of you, she got rid of the vision.
Well, I think
she got rid of her policy platform. That was the problem.
That's right.
And then it was about clinging on.
It was all about clinging on. And I said to her, you know, they're going to ask you, because she had that press conference, which didn't go very well. Yeah. And I said, they're going to ask you, if you've got rid of the man who actually implemented your policy, why are you still there? And they asked that. I said they're going to ask that, and they asked that. And she didn't really have an answer. And I said, I got something wrong, many things wrong, but one of the last things I got wrong was that I said she would have 3 weeks after she sacked me, and I think it was 6 days.
Yeah.
You know, 6 days later, she essentially threw in the towel. But in terms of her insight and her understanding of our problems, that was 100%.
And her dynamism. I like the fact that she got
very
cracking
energetic.
straight away.
She was very energetic, and she said, look, we're in a doom loop. We're not growing this economy. There are no incentives. And in order to actually pay for the welfare state that we've got, we need to grow the economy.
If you were still Chancellor, would inflation now be lower and would growth be higher?
I can't predict that, but I think we would be very much focused on growth. We were very much focused on growth.
Is growth not inflationary, though?
No, I don't think it need be. I mean, if you look at, you know, for large periods of the 90s, and really until 2007, we managed to tame inflation while at the same time growing at 2.5%. Today, inflation is at 8%, 8.5%, 8.7 actually, and we're growing at, I think, about 0.1.
Where are the Chancellor and the Prime Minister currently going wrong? Because
I think, look,
Mr Sunak is struggling with his target of halving inflation.
Yeah, I mean, that was a bold target. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy.
Is that a polite word, bold?
Well, I have a lot of sympathy for Rishi and Jeremy.
Did he drop a clanger?
No, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for Rishi and Jeremy. You've got to remember, Jeremy was not appointed by Rishi. Jeremy was appointed by Liz Truss.
Yeah.
And you know, he was there to...
And unlike you, he's not an economist.
Well, he's a very capable guy. But I feel that we've got to have a growth story. And we can't simply go into the next election promising, you know, steady as she goes. Because steady as she goes isn't going to cut it. People want hope, people want dynamism, people want some sense that we're actually going to grow our way out of our problems and live in a prosperous
Are tax
country.
cuts and going for growth the rabbit in the hat pre-election? Do you think
I don't know what
coming?
they're going to do. I think it's very interesting looking at the next year. Obviously, a lot of it will be to do with where the inflation is. So if inflation has come down a lot, I think there'll be a sense that we have more room to do things. If inflation is stubbornly high, there will be a reluctance to have tax cuts. And I think that, you know, we've got to wait and see what happens. I think it'll be very strange for a Conservative Prime Minister and Chancellor to go into the general election without having, you know, committed to more tax and more spend.
Who's a better Prime Minister, Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak?
You'd ask me that. Look, I think I think they both had strengths. I mean, if you'd asked me who the best was with Boris, I was a great Boris fan. I think he had a dynamism and a vision that, unfortunately, you know, we got rid of him, and I think that was, looking back, perhaps a mistake. But I think they're both able. They've both got strengths. But I think we don't have much time to make the case for the Conservative Party.
At the moment, is it a car crash in slow motion? Given the fact that, taxes are still so high, growth is so low.
I'll tell you something very clearly. We're not going to win carrying on this trajectory. We've got to offer something.
What does that look like? Give me your quick policy platform.
So I think inflation is going to come down. I think the Prime Minister's right. And I think going into 2024, he has to offer some incentives in this economy. Saying I'm going to increase spending and I'm going to increase taxes as a Conservative, he ain't going to win on that. He's not going to out-Labour Labour.
No. So get corporation tax down?
Well, corporation tax, I had my differences of view. I wanted it to stay at 19%. Okay. The problem we had with the mini-budget was that we put so much more into it. And I think we should have had a more staged, sequenced approach. That's always been my view. But in terms of the insight and where we needed to get to, that was 100% right.
Your reaction to the growing crisis at the BBC?
I'm appalled at this. I mean, I think that, we've, as you said earlier in your segment, we've seen other big stars, not just at the BBC, but at other news channels, being protected, being given favoured treatment. And what I don't understand is that a lot of the chattering classes know who this person is. And if he did nothing wrong, I don't see why he can't just say, this is what I've been accused of, I did nothing wrong, and just clear the air. But, we're in this crazy guessing game. I feel very sorry for the presenters who are being accused.
Correct.
And have to put their hands up and say, it wasn't me. And in the meantime, a bunch of people do know who
briefly,
the relevant person
should
was.
a member of the House of Commons, perhaps yourself, name this person in Parliament?
Well, we've done that before, and you can use parliamentary...
Would you be willing to do that?
I wouldn't, because I'm not sure I know who it is.
Okay.
I mean, I've got an idea, but I think people who do know, we're playing this crazy guessing game, and I just wish they would be more transparent and straightforward. I mean, if he did nothing wrong, then, people should say that.
Well, listen, I don't know if Liz Truss is the great Prime Minister that got away, but I'm certainly looking at the great Chancellor.
Oh, that's very kind.
But listen...
Always like being on the show.
Politics is a long game, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you rule out a return to...
Well, people always ask
politics?
me this, and I'm very focused on getting re-elected.
Yeah.
I think there's a long way to go. I mean, the Tory party's got a fight of its life in the next year, and we've got to just wait and see what happens at the general election.
All right, well, more power to you. Great to have you in the studio. Thank you, Kwasi Kwarteng. Coming up, former BBC journalist Tom Bower, who spent 26 years at Broadcasting House, gives his unfiltered verdict on the scandal engulfing the Beeb. First, the weather.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Further heavy showers over the next few days, quite breezy as well, temperatures around average for the time of year. So we look at the bigger picture, low pressure is in charge of our weather at the moment, bringing in those showers. Pushes just a little further east over the next few days, introducing a northwesterly flow. So quite chilly around some northwestern coasts of the UK. To end Tuesday, showers fade for a time across parts of England and Wales, but continue across Northern Ireland and Scotland. Through the night, some of these heavy at times, then pushing back into Northern England, North Wales by the end of the night. Temperatures for all in double figures, 14 or 15 Celsius as minimums in towns and cities, a little lower in the countryside. The best of the sunshine first thing will be across southeastern parts of the UK. Further north and west, it's quite cloudy. There'll be some showery rain, and this slowly pushes south and eastwards through the day. Showers turning heavy at times by the afternoon. The odd rumble of thunder is possible, particularly across Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland too. We could see some localised disruption. And temperatures on the cool side, 17 to 19 across the north of the UK, 20 to 23, perhaps 24 across the far southeast of England. Into Thursday, a bright start to the morning. There will be some sunny spells around too, but there's scattered showers for many, perhaps less frequent and less heavy compared to recent days. Still highs around 23 or 24.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Coming up in Uncancelled, royal biographer Tom Bower weighs into the BBC sex pics scandal, gripping the nation, and reveals if Meghan Markle is mounting a comeback as a Hollywood actor. But next in the media buzz, should generous Brits open their homes to Channel migrants in an effort to slash the £2 billion cost of housing them in hotels. My superstar panel will debate that shortly. Let's return to tomorrow's news tonight in our media buzz. More front pages have been delivered. And let's start with the Daily Telegraph. BBC sex scandal presenter faces new allegation. Also, brain fog sufferers to be tested for lack of vitamin B12. And Zelensky furious at West's absurd rejection of NATO bid. The Guardian, no extra cash for pay in the public sector, warns Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt has told ministers there will be no extra money to give millions of public sector workers an average 6% pay rise, which would potentially force departments to choose between raising salaries or cutting frontline services. Also, Met asks BBC to pause inquiry into presenter. Also, a worrying headline in The Guardian, mortgage stress likely to worsen, says the IMF. Last but not least, Daily Mail. BBC meltdown. Jeremy Vine urges scandal hit presenter to come forward. As a second person says that the alleged star sent menacing messages, but Director General still hasn't spoken to the accused star. Also, Chinese spy at the heart of Parliament. MPs say tourist tried to sneak into talk by Hong Kong dissidents. And some rare good news today. A boy for Boris. Meet Frank Alfred Odysseus Johnson, with a photo there of Carrie enjoying her new child. Congratulations to the couple. Brilliant stuff. Now, more on the media buzz with my superstar panel. Conservative peer Baroness Foster, GB News star Gary... Where did I get Gary from? Gary Lineker.
Gary who?
Calvin Robinson. Not Gary Lineker.
Hi, Dan.
Gary.
By the way, I'm glad that a certain BBC name slipped out of my mouth and not another one. Also, author and journalist Rebecca Reid. Now, the channel crisis continues, but far from finding a credible solution, Brits are instead being lined up to open their homes to migrants in a bid to help cut the government's bulging hotel bills. A report backed by former Cabinet Minister Brandon Lewis says the government should adopt a Ukrainian-style sponsorship scheme that will slash £2 billion annually from accommodation fees. The Policy Exchange think tank called for galvanisation of voluntary spirit to expand the Ukraine project to the likes of Iranians, Afghanis, Syrians and Iraqi migrants. So, Calvin Robinson, what do you think? Should we open our homes to migrants?
Can't we spend some more time talking about the BBC, Mark?
Probably. We should. We should. Maybe we should take in a few presenters. But listen, what do you think about this, the idea of people opening their homes to tackle the backlog and to empty those hotels?
I think if Brandon Lewis thinks this is a good idea, he should lead the way. Let him take a few in first and let's see how that goes down. It's a terrible idea, isn't it? Honestly. What we should do is get the government to process these asylum claims a lot faster than they're doing. It's criminal how slow they are. And then we can deport unsuccessful claims so that we have less of a backlog. For the claims that are actually in process, we can put the Rwanda scheme into play so we have somewhere to do it. And then we're on to something. I don't know why all of this is taking so long.
Baroness Foster, what do you think about this idea? Have you got space? Have you got a little spare room going?
I have some friends who have a lovely Ukrainian lady with her son. I think the British public have been more than welcoming. And I think there are many people up and down the country who have taken people in. But we have to look at, there's a difference here. There are the people we're talking about with Ukraine, Hong Kong, Syria. And then we are talking about these thousands of people, many of whom we have no idea who they are. What I have said was some of the decisions that have been made when we've been debating this whole sort of illegal immigration bill that's been, back and forth in the House of Lords and in the House of Commons. And, of course, everything we've tried to do as a government, is push back. But there's never anything that comes forward to make a solution here. And then I've sort of said, well, for those those of you who think this is a great idea and we shouldn't do anything about it, well, perhaps you should take people into your homes. But, of course, that doesn't happen. And neither are the hostels normally in the road where some of these people that make decisions and think this is a great idea happen. And we're seeing, actually, now some areas of the country, and people are becoming very, very frustrated because of incidents that may be happening. Because what do you do if you've got, 50 or 200 pretty well young men in an area, in a relatively small area? There's going to be trouble, at the end of the day. But it's about government policy, and where I may differ at times, to be fair, with my government, I can criticise my own government, but we have genuinely tried so hard to put in place some steps to try and deal with this. And we have been thwarted, frankly, at every turn by the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats.
Do you still back the Rwanda plan?
Absolutely. Full.
Why?
Absolutely full. Because Rwanda is a safe country. People from Norway are there. People from Denmark are there.
OK.
And, it's a decision that's even Ken Clarke,
on the left of the party, Tory
on the left of the party, and Ken, who is a lawyer, and he said we have to give Rwanda, it's got to have a chance, and people have got to get behind the government.
Rebecca, what do you think about this idea of people opening their homes to migrants to get the numbers down?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I should. I wouldn't do it to help the government out, but I wouldn't be averse to the idea of having somebody live with me, but on quite a lot of sort of boundaries. So I would be very happy to have somebody who was a woman who also had a child. I think there's something really lovely about being able to share childcare and all that kind of stuff. And I think there's probably a lot to be said, especially as a single parent, with buddying up with someone. That's not... I wouldn't necessarily be like, I'd like 5 20-year-old men to come live with me. So it would need to be based on parents.
Speak for yourself. OK. Well, look, I tell you something, it is an interesting debate. It will rage on. Let us know your thoughts, Dan, at gbnews.com. And a very interesting topic that is. Coming up, the Boris baby boom continues as the former PM welcomes another boy. But find out why his wife Carrie has earned a nomination when I crown tonight's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. But next in Uncancelled, top author Tom Bower gives his analysis on the sex pic scandal rocking the Beeb. He also weighs in on claims Meghan Markle is planning a sensational return to acting, as she's linked to the lead role in a follow-up to The Bodyguard. Is the Duchess's big comeback on? Tom's next. It's time now for Uncancelled, where Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. Breaking tonight, The Sun has reported on its front page that the BBC presenters at the heart of the sex pics scandal broke lockdown rules to meet another young stranger. And the paper has also been told by a different youth that the presenter sent them creepy messages with kisses and love heart emojis when they were just 17. Meanwhile, the Beeb's Director General, Tim Davie, broke his silence on Radio 4 earlier, defending the broadcaster's response to the sex pics allegations, despite the initial complaint. And I still don't think that Davie has spoken to the star involved. Take a look at this.
The BBC, as you know, Sarah, is often in the midst of quite painful and difficult affairs and storms. And I think one thing I would say is these are clearly damaging to the BBC. It's not a good situation. And under my leadership, we will absolutely be as transparent as we can.
Although you could argue that it wouldn't be The Sun doing the running on this story, it would be the BBC if the processes had worked properly.
Well, best-selling biographer Tom Bower worked for the BBC for 26 years. He joins me now. Tom, does this reflect a failure of BBC management?
Absolutely. It reflects the failure of Tim Davie himself. And I thought that in the interview today, he betrayed exactly why it's gone wrong, because he talked about pursuing the process. And the whole problem with someone like Tim Davie, who's never made a TV or radio programme in his life, is just a Coca-Cola salesman, is that he doesn't understand that television and running a huge journalistic operation like the BBC is all about individual decisions. It's about taking initiative. It's about thinking out of the box. But Tim Davie is a man who believes in ticking the box, in pursuing process. And that is why, when in May they were confronted with the first time with this problem, all they did was make a quick phone call, send an email, tick the box, and parked it. And that is exactly the sort of problem that people like Tim Davie have created with the BBC. Not only the BBC, it's the banks, it's civil service, everything. Tick a box, go through the process, and think you've done your job, you've covered yourself. But what's really missing in the BBC is personal initiative, is genius, is artistic creativity. And that is what people like Davie have crushed. So I see this moment now is not just a matter about the presenter and his fate, but about the fate of the BBC, that someone like Tim Davie is the wrong person to run a creative journalistic organisation. And I hope that at the end of all this, it isn't the fate of the presenter that matters, but the fate of the BBC and Tim Davie himself, because he's just the wrong person to lead the corporation.
Well, I think he proved that during the Gary Lineker Match of the Day drama, in which Davie looked like a passenger in that story.
Well, not only a passenger, but because he's not a programme maker, he didn't understand when he rightly decided to reprimand Lineker that he then didn't think, well, what shall I put on the air next Saturday? Because he's not a programme maker.
And also, he didn't look to have studied Lineker's contract before suspending him.
But the whole problem is that when I was in the BBC, the Director General and the people who ran the programme would go down to the coalface because that's where they used to work. They understood how you make programmes, what's the quality of people. But the quality of people in the BBC at the moment, they can't commission good drama, there's no comedy, current affairs and the news is very pedestrian. That's why GB News is such a breath of fresh air.
Well, indeed. I mean, we've seen EastEnders lose millions of viewers.
Exactly. The Daily programme loses 12% a year.
Yeah.
And that's Davie's fault.
And he lets Ken Bruce go. Ken Bruce had the biggest audience in Europe, not just the UK. And he goes off to commercial rival. Can I ask you about the alleged star at the heart of this? Why are they keeping stum? Why haven't they held a press conference?
Well, you know, the person probably thinks they're innocent, and he's got probably a crisis manager who says, keep your head down.
Right, you've not... Their advice would be, you've not broken the law, would be maybe their defence. You've just been...
Look, for that particular person, it's clearly a huge tragedy. I think the persecution now could possibly push this person to suicide.
Right.
I think they'll be pretty careful. I think that it's been blown up by The Sun for their own reasons, by Sky because they hate the BBC, and the real fault is that Tim Davie didn't take control right at the beginning and make it quite clear that the BBC has got credibility in all this.
Now, what's this about Meghan Markle, who is the subject of your best-selling new biography, returning to Hollywood, returning to the big screen?
Well, last week we talked about how it was the week from hell. She had absolutely no idea what she was going to do. So in reply to that, this week, what her publicists have come up with is that tomorrow in California, LA, they'll be nominating who's going to be for the next month's Emmys. And Meghan is hoping that her Netflix series will be nominated, and Meghan also hopes that she might be named as one of the judges to award a prize. She's looking for some way to come back into Hollywood. And then they leaked this ridiculous story that Kevin Costner wants to cast her in a new version of The Bodyguard. So suddenly Meghan returns to Hollywood, where she never was in the first place. But somehow she has to feel that somehow she's wanted. That's her story this week.
Do you identify cracks in the royal marriage?
Which crack? Which royal marriage?
Because if you see the couple, Harry and Meghan, pursuing separate careers slightly, talk of a solo documentary for Harry in Africa. Meghan goes back to Hollywood. Does this reflect a growing distance between the two?
No, that's a modern marriage. I mean, just people have different interests. I don't think there's any... So far, I haven't seen the evidence. And all those people who on the Twitter sphere who say they're about to divorce and all the rest of it, I want to see the evidence first.
There you go. Well, evidence is what it's all about. We have the evidence of a brand new Johnson. Boris and Harry have had a baby, which is wonderful news. Do you think...
For all the other Boris Johnson children.
Exactly. I mean, we won't speculate as to how many kids he's got, but congratulations to Boris and Carrie, their third baby together, Frank Alfred Odysseus Johnson, or Frankie for short. Listen, he's a proper family man now. Has he found domestic bliss, do you think?
No. I don't think so. I think that he is completely conflicted. I think he is terribly unhappy. He wants to find a way back into politics. I think he's landed himself in the most dreadful situation, but he doesn't know how to get out of it. And so making babies is one one way, but it's not the way for Boris.
He's got money, which is one problem solved.
Yes, but the problem with Boris is, even if he earns £2 million, he'll spend £3 million. So he hasn't got money in the long term. What he wants to do is get back into Downing Street, but that's going to be a long, long time in coming, and it's got nothing to do with his marital bliss or not at the moment. He's a tragedy for himself and for the Tory party, the Tory government. And that is really, for those who wished him well at the outset, it's a terrible, terrible, sad moment to be.
He will continue to make money, but do you think he seeks career redemption at some point?
Absolutely.
Is his career unfinished business?
Absolutely. I mean, he feels knifed. He feels betrayed by Rishi. He feels betrayed by all the people. But in the end, of course, we keep on saying this, he's the architect of his own misfortune. But I do think that he thinks, and I think he might still have a chance in some years' time coming back.
Tom, you are a top, perhaps the top investigative journalist in the country. When do you think the name of the alleged BBC star will drop?
Sometime in the next 7 days, but I wouldn't imagine it tomorrow.
OK.
There's too many laws of defamation and the rest. And the fact that the Sun doesn't dare name him shows exactly the problem.
Yes, brilliant. Tom, great to have you in the studio. My thanks to best-selling biographer Tom Bauer. Well, it's time now for today's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. With Baroness Foster, Calvin Robinson and Rebecca Reid. So, Baroness Foster, your Greatest Britain.
Well, my Greatest Britain this evening is it's the people actually that are behind the Don't Kill Cash campaign. We've now got 200,000 people who are backing it. I'm backing it, and I think they should be the nomination for this evening.
Absolutely, a GB News campaign which I couldn't support more fully. Calvin, who's your Greatest Britain?
Mine is the Johnsons. Our former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has given us all some good news today, the birth of their new child.
And I love the name, don't you? It's an absolute corker.
It is a great classical name, isn't it?
Brilliant stuff. Let's just hear it one more time. It is Frank Alfred Odysseus Johnson. I wonder which of those names Boris came up with. How about Rebecca Reid, your Greatest Britain?
I've gone for Prince Charles for attending the Climate Finance Forum, which I think was a very good...
King Charles, of course.
King Charles.
It's easily done.
I'm so sorry. He was Prince for a bit. And also for continuing to be tough on Andrew, which I think is really important. His vision for a slimmed-down monarchy might well be what saves the monarchy.
And Jacqueline, your Union Jackass.
Well, today...
Oh, forgive me, let me announce the winner. Let me tell you. It is Don't Kill Cash is my...
Hooray!
announcement.
Well
so,
done.
Jacqueline, you've won that. There you go. I'll get the hang of this format one day. Baroness Foster, your Union Jackass now.
Well, not everybody knows about this, but former leader of the Scottish Parliament, Nicola Sturgeon, billed taxpayers for a luxury flight and a £500 a night hotel as part of her farewell tour.
Indeed. Well, that's a very worthy nomination, I've got to say. She's no loss to Scotland. Calvin Robinson, your Union Jackass.
Mine is the BBC for making me talk about them all evening. No, not really. for this host and his dodgy business.
Indeed. I mean, listen, it is going to rumble on, isn't it, Calvin? Do you see a full stop coming to this story anytime soon?
I don't know, but I'm going on holiday until it comes out properly.
Well, you're a very, very lucky man.
All you do is go on holiday. You're never here. You leave me every week.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Rebecca, go on then. Who's caught your eye today?
I'm going to make it Calvin for leaving me.
Probably that would do it.
Listen, I'm a Carrie Johnson super fan. The woman can wear a headband like nobody else I've ever known. But I've made it her because I don't think she should have signed off on Odysseus. I'm sorry. I'm not sure it's a fair thing to do to a child.
Well, I think it's pretty funky, I've got to say. I'm very pleased for the couple. As I said earlier, it's a rare example of some good news. Rebecca, I'm going to say that, yes, you've offered a good nomination there, but I'll give it to the BBC. Well done, Calvin.
Hey.
It's got to be our disgraced national broadcaster. Rebecca, your prediction as to when we get a full stop on this story, when perhaps the identity of the alleged star is revealed.
Oh, look, Tom is the expert, and Tom has seen a lot of these kind of cycles go around. If he says within the next 7 days, I'm deferring to him. I imagine next 7 days. But I really hope it's soon, because I do feel for everybody else who works for the BBC who wants to tweet to say that it's not there.
Either way, it's time to defund the BBC, isn't it? Stop forcing people to pay the TV tax.
Or we could defund the police.
Why should people pay the BBC to watch GB News? They shouldn't have to.
There you go. It's all kicked off. Folks, thank you so much for your company tonight. Well done to my brilliant panellists. I'm back tomorrow at 9 for my digest and lots more to come. And don't forget, I'll be covering the weekend shift as well. So do make sure you stay with GB News. Headliners is next.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Further heavy showers over the next few days, quite breezy as well, temperatures around average for the time of year. So we look at the bigger picture. Low pressure is in charge of our weather at the moment, bringing in those showers. Pushes just a little further east over the next few days, introducing a northwesterly flow. So quite chilly around some northwestern coasts of the UK. To end Tuesday, showers fade for a time across parts of England and Wales, but continue across Northern Ireland and Scotland. Through the night, some of these heavy at times, then pushing back into Northern England and North Wales by the end of the night. Temperatures for all in double figures, 14 or 15 Celsius as minimums in towns and cities, a little lower in the countryside. The best of the sunshine first thing will be across southeastern parts of the UK. Further north and west, it's quite cloudy. There'll be some showery rain, and this slowly pushes south and eastwards through the day. Showers turning heavy at times by the afternoon. The odd rumble of thunder is possible, particularly across Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland too. We could see some localised disruption. And temperatures on the cool side, 17 to 19 across the north of the UK, 20 to 23, perhaps 24 across the far southeast of England. Into Thursday, a bright start to the morning. There will be some sunny spells around too, but there's scattered showers for many, perhaps less frequent and less heavy compared to recent days. Still highs around 23 or 24.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.